another episode of Ask the Agronomist. So we're on location today at North Iowa Area Community College. It's right outside of Mason City, Iowa, in the north central part of the state. And over the weekend, May 27th through the 29th, a lot of areas across Latham Country experienced some frost conditions. This particular field, corn that we're standing in front of here, was planted April 28th. It did get down to 31 degrees that night. We'll look at a soybean field here in a little while too that was planted May 8th. Same conditions here at NIAC at the community college. So lots of questions coming in on what kind of decisions should we be making, what should we look at, what should we be looking for. So Phil's here with us today, going to go over some of those basics. So let's get started on corn, Phil, then. What are some things that you look for first? What stage is the field that we're at here? Where do we start?
Yeah, sure. I think, especially at this point in the growing season, it's kind of frustrating to see frost. We think we're out of the boat at this point. Typically it's earlier, smaller plants, and had a lot of people worried, oh, it's already, the growing point's above ground. In most cases, it's not. So this field here is for the most part, around V4. It was probably pushing towards V5, so around that growth stage. V5, V6 is typically when that growing point moves slightly above ground level. So if you dig it up, your growing point's going to be probably just below the soil line. The key thing with what we're looking at right now in this field, if you pan out and look at it, it looks pretty tough. It's pretty well, a lot of them are melted to the ground. They're brown, probably black earlier, white. Corn can kind of show all different kind of discolorations when it gets hit by a frost, depending how hard. And the key is what you said, 31 degrees. So it may have been 30, 31. It wasn't extremely cold, what we call a hard freeze. The 28 degree mark is really kind of the break off point for soybeans and corn. So it did fry that soft tissue on the corn plant, makes it look really tough and really bad. But the other thing you got to remember, not only is the growing point still below ground, but it's also protected, especially if you have a larger plant, by a lot of leaf sheath material. So there's a good 3/8 of an inch there just on this plant, even if the growing point was above ground, that it'd still be protected, kind of insulated from some of those issues. Now there's a lot of factors at play. We're standing in quite a bit of residue right now, which can kind of, depending on moisture levels and residue, all those things can make a difference. And how bad the frost was in some cases. It's just kind of been really sporadic from what we've seen, but all those things kind of come into play, whether it's spotty in a field or covering most of the field. So it's a little bit field by field basis in terms of how we're looking at it and how you should be evaluating. But this is the corn side of things looks pretty tough, but it's actually better than what you probably think in terms of how the plant will recover.
Okay, so with all those variables at play, then timing is really important. What kind of timeline should farmers be following when they evaluate a field and then make their final decisions?
Yeah, and this is the time of the year when people don't want to wait, because obviously, I as an agronomist, the first thing I'd say is we're at that point where you lose yield faster. It's more than a 3/4 of a bushel per day, but you need to wait, especially on corn. To me, it's pretty easy to say to wait, despite how ugly it looks. The corn will recover. 9 chances out of 10. I haven't seen any of the cornfields I've looked at are not big enough. Did not have frost deep enough in the soil. Obviously, if that 28 degrees can get down into the soil a little bit and fry that growing point, then we have issues. But for the most part, we haven't had a lot of cases where that happens. So 3 to 5 days, you need to slow down. And I noticed on this one here, it's hard to see. It looks pretty ugly, but there is a little bit of green just popping up from the whorl. So, in 3 to 5 days, especially with the heat we're looking at, that's a great thing. Typically frost, it's kind of followed by a period of cool. We're heading into hot temperatures, summertime, so that's going to be good. It's going to push these leaves out. It's still a similar fashion, 3 to 5 days, probably less than 5 days, you'll start to see new leaves emerging. That should give you some confidence that the plant is going to come back just fine, because you got to remember that it does have a root system established under there. This has nice nodal roots coming out already. You can see the seeds still attached on this one, but it's pretty well past that seedling phase. It's transitioning to using these nodal roots here to survive off of. So you're not going to get that if you replant. Obviously, you're restarting the cycle. This plant already knows where it's at in the season and knows that it just needs to pop out a few more leaves and be back on track.
Okay, so I guess looking forward, we're kind of entering into that post-emerge stage. Maybe we're thinking about spraying, maybe we're thinking about different things. When it comes to a scenario like this, what are some things we should think about as we march on this season?
Yeah, I know, and I've heard different comments on spraying and maybe even mowing or taking out some of that leaf material. And in general, I wouldn't recommend that. Like I said, your leaves are going to push up from the center of the whorl. And this field especially, you can look, we'll take some pictures, but you can tell it's melted down. It looks terrible, which is actually a good thing for the corn plant. It's going to be easy for that tissue to get out of the way. The larger corn plants you have, if you had V4, V5, V6, even corn plants that got hit by frost, they may have some issues, with that more leaf material getting twisted up and hanging up that new growth as it starts to come out. But in general, that's not typically an issue. So, the other comment I'd say on spraying is I think a lot of people are making the right decision to maybe slow down on post-spray, as tough as that is, because the weeds are coming strong this year. You got to remember that not only is frost a stress on this plant, but spraying is also a stress. Despite having the genetics or traits inside this that protect it from chemistries, it still has to fight through those. It still has to metabolize. So, if you're sick and unhealthy and then you get another thing thrown at you, it's even harder to fight it off. So if we can get a leaf or two out, like I said, 80s and 90s this week, it's going to push that leaf material out quick. It's going to recover quickly. So once we get to see some of that new growth, we'll be back on track, and then we can give it another shot. But the other thing you got to remember is this is right at that time, especially these ones, V4 to V7, is when it's determining that girth of the year. So let's give it a little bit of time to recover before we go after it with post sprays.
Okay, so in a frost scenario, are we looking at yield loss already from this, or what can we expect on that front?
Yeah, it's tough to say. Like I said, it depends on the stage. Every field's going to be a little bit different. I'd say in some cases you're going to lose a little bit, but you won't lose as much as if you replant it, that's for sure. You're going to lose 15% probably at this point if we replant early June. So, the corn plant's going to throw out a few leaves. It's going to be back on track. It's going to know where it's at, and it's not going to have to shorten the growing season. Whereas if you plant, corn in the ground now, it's going to come up and know that it's out of season a little bit. So it's going to adjust and reduce its potential. So, no, just give it the time that we said. Watch it recover. Take a few days off. Maybe don't drive by the field every day. Go back, in 5 days to a week, and take a look at it. And I imagine you'll be happy with the progress it's making. They're pretty resilient plants.
All right, great. Good tips for corn. Why don't we head over across the field here then? We've got a soybean field we'll take a look at. Same thing. May 8th planting date, 31 degrees overnight. We'll see kind of what happened to the field and what we should be evaluating on a soybean side. Okay, here we are on the soybean side of the farm here at North Iowa Area Community College. So Phil, kind of same thing. Why don't you stage this field that we're standing at and talk a little bit about what you're seeing?
Sure. So it's kind of tough to see behind us. Obviously there's a lot of residue. This is a continuous no-till farm. But if you look at the growth stage, and I know we talked about this here recently, we've got some unifoliates up here on top. This is a healthy plant, obviously. And then we've got the cotyledons sitting here. So this would be considered VC, or vegetative cotyledon. Like we talked before, it's V1 once we get that first trifoliate out, which is sitting right there. So just in general, we talked about the corn. The growing point's pretty much at ground level, slightly below, depending where you're at. Soybeans is a different story. They're really more vulnerable at this point. That growing point is essentially at the very top of that meristem. Right where the little trifoliates are going to be coming out of. That's where your meristem is. The growing point essentially. But the thing you got to remember with soybeans is, just like with hail damage, they can regrow. So depending where they get hit, and this one even singed a little on the side of the leaf, but depending where they get hit and damaged, any of the lowest most node essentially, so this cotyledonary node here has axillary buds, and you can even see them if you look at them hard enough. But any node on a soybean plant can regrow or branch essentially if you see that in a hail situation. So it's important to evaluate in terms of the hail damage, not only the growing point, the top of the plant, but also below that. And below the cotyledons is really the most important, where the hypocotyl region is here. You'll see kind of where the soil line is. It's kind of white below ground, and then it turns to a purple up to those cotyledons, those seed leaves that are providing for the plant. So that area there is probably of most importance. And in some of these situations, we can look through the field and find varying degrees of of maybe burnt unifoliates all the way down to even the hypocotyl region. So right under those cotyledons have been, I call them water soaked. It looks brown, and in that case the plant is dead. So if it's brown below those cotyledons, then the plant cannot regrow, because this is its last ditch effort, is right there at that node. So that's kind of what we're looking at. Most of these are similar stage. Some of them were a little bit behind, and in that case probably took it a little harder. The ones that were further ahead looks like they were a little better off, and that's just more protection there from the leaves, and some of it's how the stem was coming out of the residue, maybe put it to be at a more vulnerable position to getting hit by some of that colder air.
Okay, so same thing in soybeans, a lot of variables at play. What kind of timing should we look at? We've all most likely went out to see the field, but how long should we wait before we make a decision?
Soybeans is tough too, because like I said, we know where the growing point's at. It's you know, we want to make a decision now because we know that growing point's above ground. The plant still has an ability to recover, though. We got to remember that. So, you know, the first thing is to evaluate that lower region of the stem and try to decide, you know, if it's brown and laying over, bent over, there's a good chance that's dead. So you got to evaluate, you know, what are those areas like? Like in this field situation, it's within row, and it's not every plant for sure. So in my opinion, I definitely would not replant this field. It's maybe lost a little bit of stand, you know, maybe 5 to 10%. It probably, most people probably think it looks worse. You know, in that case, if it's within row and just scattered throughout the field, you know, it's not a situation where you want to replant. Let them regrow, and the other ones that are there, even if you have a stand of 80, 90, or 100,000, which you probably have at least that, will more than make up the difference and branch out and capture the sunlight. So, but, you know, on the flip side of that, if you've got areas in the field that are totally gone, you know, that obviously have brown below the cotyledons, then that may be a little easier, you know, idea to go out and replant, you know, make that decision and you know, get those areas and whatnot. But just make sure you evaluate the whole field, because there's a lot of things that come into play. We've got a lot of residue out here. We've also got 15-inch rows, you know, so that makes a little bit of a difference on your population and spacing and how they recover, you know, the competition between plants. You know, the other thing I would say on the replant with soybeans that seems to be forgotten sometimes is, you know, we're sitting at actually the ideal stage right here, VC to V1 is about your last effort to replant, to have anything come out of those replant beans. And what I mean by that is if you planted soybeans in between these rows or alongside them to try to help boost the population, they're likely not going to contribute to yield. They need to be really at the vegetative cotyledon stage or below. You know, in that case, you'd be better off, you know, trying to put some in beside it. But in this case, you know, they're going to end up being just a weed. And soybeans, because they're going to be farther enough ahead that they're going to outcompete the other ones, and those ones you replanted won't have many pods on them. So it's a kind of a tough decision on the soybean side, but you can still get out there and evaluate. You know, I said before, stand counts are a good thing. You know, go out, lay the tape measure down, you know, like we talked about the last couple weeks, get an idea what the stand looks like and the ones that are dead. That'll give you more confidence in making a decision. If you notice, okay, we're only down 5%, maybe 10% in soybeans, that's not as big of a deal.
Okay, great tips. So moving forward then, what are some implications that we should consider as we get into post-emerge spraying, all those other activities?
Sure, you know, on the yield side of things, I'd say, you know, if you were to replant, obviously you're going to see a little bit of a you know, yield hit just because a little bit later and so forth, you know, 5 to 10% at least. But in terms of, you know, the situation we're looking at here, in this case, they probably won't have any yield hit. I mean, it's just a field by field situation. You know, the same thing we talked a little bit about herbicides and corn. We have a little bit more time in beans, which is good. I think they'll easily recover. You know, we've got really nice warm temperatures coming up, so those ones you're going to know in 3 to 5 days or so, you're going to start to see new growth popping out. If it did kill, you know, one of the top part of the plant, it'll start to throw something out from one of these auxiliary buds below that, give you a good indication, okay, what's green. So that's really the best in either situation. I would say give it a little bit of time. Go out there and see how it's greening up, you know, because right now it looks really tough and it makes us want to, you know, jump the gun and maybe go do something before we should. And, you know, your best yield potential is sitting out there in the field right now. And if we till it up and it's still got good potential, like I said, these beans may not look like a lot, but they're still further ahead than if we'd replant them right now. So, Yeah, it's a field by field situation with soybeans, and I think, like I said, don't get too excited. Evaluate those lower stems, look for that healthy green and purple color and so forth, and just make sure that you're giving it a little bit of time to recover before you make a quick decision, or give us a call. So.
All right, sounds good. Thanks, Phil, for those tips in both corn and soybeans today. Summary of the day, really get out into those rows and see what you've got, see where the regrowth is maybe even already starting as we're hitting day 3 and some areas day 4 of recovery from that frost event. So thank you, listeners, for tuning in this week. We'll be back next week with another topic.